Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating look at how the wealthy actually handle their cash. Okay, let's dive into this. Because there's this massive myth floating around out there that rich people just completely avoid banks. You know the one, right? You've probably heard it a million times or seen those articles claiming banks are the ultimate enemy. But is that actually true? Well, to find out, we're going to look at some pretty surprising data straight from the Federal Reserve. And spoiler alert, it completely flips this whole idea right on its head.
So, the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances reveals something pretty incredible. A typical middle-class household holds about 15% of their net worth in cash. That equates to roughly $13,000. But then, look at the top 1%. For them, cash makes up a tiny 2% of their net worth. But here's the kicker. In actual dollars, that 2% is nearly $700,000. So yeah, the wealthy keep far more actual cash on hand than the average person, sometimes 50 times as much. But, and this is absolutely crucial, they keep it as a vastly smaller slice of their overall pie. They use the bank for one specific job, and they absolutely refuse to be the bank's cheap supplier. They're just not going to let their cash sit around idle, right? Not when the bank is just going to turn around and lend it out at a massive markup.
To really grasp how they pull this off, we need to look at a 30-year financial race between two guys from our source material, Jake and Marcus. Now, they're the exact same age, they make the exact same income, and today, they both get exactly $50,000. The only difference is what they decide to do next. Jake takes what feels like the perfectly safe path. He parks all 50 grand in a traditional savings account earning, 0.01%. Marcus, he takes a totally different route. He divides his $50,000, keeping a smart reserve in cash and deploying the rest into specific investments. This gives the asset data we're about to look at some real tangible stakes. So hold this race in your mind because the gap between these two at the finish line is literally going to blow you away.
First up, the wealth engines. Asset number one, broad market funds. We're not talking about flashy individual stocks, gold, or, speculative crypto here. We're talking about the unglamorous but incredibly powerful strategy of just buying a low-cost fund that owns the entire stock market. Over the long run of American history, the broad stock market has returned around 10% a year. Now, if you strip out a 3% average inflation rate, you're left with a 7% real return and actual purchasing power. Now, what's really interesting about this is how we can measure that growth using a simple math shortcut called the Rule of 72. You just divide 72 by your yearly return and boom, that tells you how many years it takes your money to double. So if Marcus gets a 7% real return, we divide 72 by 7, which gives us a little under 11. Over our 30-year race, Marcus's money is going to double nearly 3 full times. His money becomes twice as large, then 4 times, then almost 8 times as large, simply by letting it compound.
But what about Jake? Let's apply that exact same math shortcut to his safe savings account, the one earning 0.01%. If you divide 72 by 0.01, you get a genuinely staggering number, 7,000. No joke, it would take Jake 7,000 years for his money to double just one single time. So while Marcus is doubling his wealth 3 times over a few decades, Jake's money is essentially just standing completely still.
Let's move on to the invisible return. Asset number 2, tax-sheltered accounts.
Think 401ks, IRAs, and health savings accounts. Most people just think of these as basic, boring buckets for retirement, right? But they are so much more than that. They act like invisible shields. They physically prevent the tax collector from dragging down your growth year after year on dividends and the quiet little trades happening inside those funds. To put a hard number on it, let's say a standard taxable account has about 0.5% of tax drag every year. Sounds tiny, right? Like, who cares? But over 30 years, compounding against Marcus's $35,000 investment pool, that tiny drag would cost him $78,000. So the absolutely crucial point here is that by using a sheltered account, Marcus earns a $78,000 invisible return purely by avoiding that tax drag. It's not some crazy new investment, it's literally just a smarter container. And that is exactly why the wealthy fill these accounts up first.
Next up is the enterprise shift. Asset number 3. Business ownership.
Now, it's really important to be completely impartial here and acknowledge straight away that this path carries genuine, serious risk. Owning a business isn't just a passive side hustle, and honestly, most small businesses never make anyone rich. But when it works, it is the single biggest structural difference between people who are merely comfortable and those who are genuinely wealthy. The Federal Reserve data shows that right in the middle class, business ownership accounts for just 2% of net worth. But at the top 1%, it skyrockets to 41%. It's no longer just about renting your money out to someone else's enterprise. It's a massive shift where your money moves into owning the very enterprises that other people's money flows into. You become, in a very literal sense, the bank.
Moving right along to the magnifying glass. Asset number 4, income real estate.
So let's start with the highly seductive math that draws so many people into real estate. Imagine you use $50,000 as a down payment to buy a $250,000 property. Your 50 grand is now controlling an asset worth 5 times as much. If that property appreciates at just 3% a year, the growth isn't on your 50K, it's on the entire 250K. Over 30 years, with a tenant helping pay the loan, your original 50K can theoretically multiply by 12 times. I mean, it sounds absolutely amazing, right? But we really have to look at the whole picture objectively here, because that clean 12 times number hides some fairly brutal realities. Leverage often completely ignores the hidden risks. We're talking decades of mortgage interest that can literally eclipse the cost of the house itself. It ignores the roof that inevitably fails, the furnace that dies in the middle of January, and those terrifying stretches where the property sits completely empty, but the bank, well, they still expect their payment on the first of the month. Not to mention constantly climbing property taxes and insurance.
There's a quote from the source material that sums this up absolutely perfectly. Leverage is a magnifying glass. It makes the wins bigger, and it makes the losses bigger in exactly the same proportion. The magnifying glass simply does not care which one it's pointed at. Every single one of these wealth-building engines we've discussed demands a trade-off. You have to trade the comforting feeling of absolute certainty today for a larger but genuinely uncertain reward later. Which brings us to the final, critical piece of Marcus's puzzle.
And that missing piece is the smart reserve. Asset number 5, treasuries. Remember, Marcus didn't invest every single penny. He kept enough in the bank to actually sleep at night, a real 3 to 6 month cash reserve. But the wealthy don't just dump this reserve into a basic savings account. Instead, they use government-backed short-term treasury bills or money market funds. Let's move to and see how this builds when we look at the actual numbers on a $15,000 reserve. In a basic traditional savings account, that 15 grand earns a whopping $1.50 a year. Yeah, but in short-term treasuries, that exact same $15,000 earns around $570 a year. It's the exact same government-backed safety, making it just about as safe as the savings account you took the money out of, with nearly the exact same instant access, but you get almost a 400 times difference in return. This is what using the bank correctly actually looks like.
All right, the 30-year finish line.
Okay, so 30 years have officially passed. It's time to settle the race between Jake and Marcus and see exactly where they stand. Now, to be completely fair and accurate here, we have to measure their final totals in real inflation-adjusted purchasing power, because inflation has been silently eating away at both of their piles of cash for 3 straight decades. Here are the final results. Jake, who kept all $50,000 in his safe savings account, well, he never saw a red number. He never had a bad day at the bank, but inflation invisibly robbed him. His $50,000 shrank to just $20,000 in actual purchasing power. He lost nearly 60% of his real wealth simply by trying to be safe. Now look at Marcus. He kept his 15K reserve and put 35K to work. Through the exact same 30 years, through the exact same market crashes, and the exact same inflation, Marcus's investments propelled his purchasing power past $250,000, landing north of $270,000.
That leaves us with a staggering wealth gap of 13 to 1. And remember, Marcus didn't start with a bigger salary. He didn't get some lucky stock tip. They both started with the exact same $50,000 on the exact same day. This massive chasm exists purely because Marcus decided how much cash was enough for an emergency reserve and then firmly refused to let the rest sit still. Deciding what your enough number is and putting the rest to work completely changes your entire financial trajectory. It's a real game changer.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final deeply personal question to think about based on all the data we've covered today. What is the real cost of the cash you're holding at this moment? Seriously, look at your timeline, look at your balances. The cost of feeling entirely safe today might just be the most expensive financial decision you are currently making. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring how to put your own numbers to work.